Director of the Division of Endocrinology. One of the other hats I get to wear, which is always a pleasure for me to do, is as Deputy Director of the CTSA. And on behalf of Becky Jackson, Tanya Matthew, and all of our team, I want to welcome you to a really exciting Grand Rounds today. We are co-sponsoring today's Grand Rounds with the Department of Medicine as part of a major program in the CTSA. For those who don't know, the CTSA, which we call our CCTS, Center for Clinical and Translational Sciences, is dedicated to translational research in the College of Medicine and across the university, supporting much of clinical research, both through funding, but also through infrastructure that supports a lot of what we do. One of our really major and important programs is what we call a translational innovation program. And that translational innovation program has a number of components, and one of them is what we're going to hear about today, which is the CCTS Inventor Showcase. We really focus on supporting both career development as well as team science across the clinical research continuum. And a part of that supporting of our faculty as well as team science is teaming up to enable translation and innovation leading to technology transfer. So very excited to discuss those opportunities with everyone today. You hear some specific examples, as well as hearing from some leaders here in different aspects of that continuum to help you and guide you if you have a focus in those areas. So I'm going to turn the rest of the Grand Rounds over to our MC for the rest, Dr. Katagnani, who's going to introduce our speakers and get us rolling. We have a bunch of speakers today, so thank you, Karen, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. Ringel, for talking about the program. And thanks for joining us. I'm Karen Katagnani, a hospitalist here at OSU. And it's my pleasure to introduce three of my colleagues and their work in collaboration with the TCO in developing a suite of apps to standardize and improve patient care, one of which they'll be talking about in detail today. I'd like to also mention that our division supports a medical informatics fellowship yearly, and our clinical informatics team works closely with our fellows as well. And so first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Manoj Ramachandran, who has been our group's leading mentor in all things related to professional billing for new and seasoned faculty alike. Next will be Dr. John Bertrand, who held a prior position as a consulting programmer and analyst before medical school, and he contributes his expertise to support division operations and improving provider efficiency. And finally, we have our first speaker, Dr. George Onderko, really the definition of support behind the scenes, as he's one of our division's nocturnists. He'll be starting our talk discussing his first app in development, again with the TCO, which reduces billing errors and revenue loss. And I'll stay on till the end to help manage questions, but I'll let Dr. Onderko take it away.
Thank you so much, Matt and Karen, for that introduction. I wanted to take a moment to thank Madeline Gonzalez and Tanya Matthews for their work arranging this combined Grand Rounds in Inventor Showcase. We're delighted to have such a diverse audience to share our work with. Please remember to place all your questions in the Q&A section. Our discussion is going to focus on our medical billing app. It's going to be why we did it, what it is, and how we made it. We're fortunate to have Stuart Davis and Nelson Law also presenting and discussing some of the opportunities for the next great inventor sitting in today's audience. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Manoj Ramachandran and why a billing app in the first place.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting us to present a topic which we are extremely passionate about. Before we started this journey of creation of an app, we needed to answer one question. Is there a problem that we are trying to solve? The answer was easy. No matter whom we asked, we always got the same answer. What was the problem that we are trying to address? E&M codes are complex and difficult to make sense of the coding rules. E&M stands for Evaluation Management Codes. Next slide, please. E&M codes are a subtype of CPT codes that reimburse physicians and APPs for their cognitive labor. These are the 5-digit codes, as you're aware. It's very easy to get confused between them. For example, a level 3 initial hospital visit may look exactly like a level 3 subsequent visit. These are needlessly complex, and if you use your logic, there's a very high likelihood of mistake. Most of us got no training about this until we started our job. And the risk assessment in these codes is not aligned with our concept of clinical risk. EMR-based interventions and template-based cheat sheets often result in note bloat and can make our notes meaningless. I know it's hard to imagine something can make our notes even more incoherent. Next slide, please. What are the tasks at hand for a physician while they're trying to choose the right E&M code? So we have to choose the correct code based on three things. Number one, the site of service. This is a very straightforward question. Did you see the patient in a clinic, hospital, or was this patient inpatient status or observation status? Personally, from my experience, I know where I am most of the time, except when I'm doing a James admission from ER in the middle of the night, where I'm already searching for my soul. Other than that, I can complete this task without the help of an app. The second task is to define the medical necessity. Was there a medical reason for you to see this patient? This also appears very simple and straightforward, but be mindful of a few traps here. For example, if you didn't write a chief complaint for your initial hospital visit or your subsequent encounters, Medicare can declare that there was no medical necessity for you to see that patient. The last and most interesting task is that the services provided should be accurately reported in. In other words, the only proof of your work rests in your documentation. Basically, we don't get paid for doing our job. We get paid to write a note. Next slide, please. This slide just reminds you of the golden principle of practice of medicine, which helps you to get paid and stay out of trouble. Next slide, please. History of E&M codes. E&M codes were established by Congress in 1995. 2 years later, they made some minor revisions, and there you have your 1995 guidelines and 1997 guidelines. And 1997 is the last time many of these codes were revised. On the outpatient side, the rules were changed, revised in 2021. This was an attempt to simplify the process for physicians. At least they made it easier for you to document the history and exam. But the MDM portion is still complex, and you need some kind of tool to navigate that. Next slide, please. The two other terms of interest to us are here, upcoding and downcoding. Upcoding or overcoding is submitting a charge higher than what's supported by your documentation. Often this is a result of inadequate documentation rather than intentional upcoding. This is considered fraud, and this is not a place where we want to be. The other end of the spectrum is downcoding or undercoding. That means you're submitting a charge lower than what's supported by your documentation. This may be the result of an oversight, but it's often intentionally done by some of the early career physicians to avoid an audit. Unfortunately, this will result in an apparent decrease in the provider productivity and indirectly increase the risk of burnout. Interestingly, this is also considered fraud. Next slide, please. So how do you document accurately? So we need to make sure that all three key components are in your note. So what are the key components? So these are the history, physical exam, and the medical decision making. The history includes the chief complaint, HPI, the review of system, past family and social history. But the problem here is that we need a different type of history based on the code selected. The physical exam, again, you need different number of bullet points or different number of systems based on your code selection. The third and most confusing part is the medical decision making, which itself has three components: the diagnosis, the data, and the risk. But the risk is the most important aspect. The risk of diagnosis and management may not always make sense to us. Next slide, please. So how do we do overall? So there's no clear-cut answer to this as to how often physicians make a mistake in their coding practice. But who's interested in this? Medicare and private payers are interested in this. Medicare started this program, CERT, the Comprehensive Error Rate Testing Program, in 2009 to calculate the financial impact of incorrect code selection. It monitors all types of payment. So the financial impact of Part B of provider improper payment is more than $8 billion in the financial year 2020. Next slide, please. What are the error categories? I'm sure none of you are surprised by looking at this pie chart. As you can see, more than 2/3 of the time it's a documentation issue. The blue portion here in the pie chart, if you combine the dark blue and the light blue, the largest 63% of the time it's insufficient documentation. The other 4.4% of the time it's no documentation. Fortunately, only 4% of the time we're forgetting to write a note. The next category is the yellow portion of the pie chart. That's a lack of medical necessity, like someone forgot to write a chief complaint, etc. Next slide, please. Is there a solution to this problem? I envision two different solutions to this problem. Either we have to spend endless hours to educate ourselves on the intricacies of coding, basically transform ourselves to a coder. Based on my conversation with my colleagues, I have not met a single person who is interested in doing this. The other option is to have a tool in your pocket that will walk you through step by step to choose the right code based on your documentation. This tool should help you to build, should you choose based on the complexity of MDM or based on the time. It should educate you on the concepts of the risk and the elements of your key components. And the more you use, the more efficient you should become. And it should update periodically when the regulatory changes happen. And it should also assist you when you're trying to use less commonly utilized codes like prolonged care, telemedicine, care management codes, etc. With that, I invite our technology guru, Dr. John Bertrand, to demonstrate one such tool to you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. John Bertrand. The solution that we came up with is a phone application that's independent of any electronic medical record system, intentionally so that medical students perhaps, but for sure, resident physicians as well as newly graduated attending physicians can use this tool to assist them to learn how to bill. Perhaps even more seasoned physicians with an atypical patient they may be taking care of and are not sure about the level of care. The advantage of being independent of an electronic medical record system is that there's no protected health information within the app, so it'll always be HIPAA compliant. But also because it's a phone app, it's always at the ready and everyone will have fast access to it. What I'd like to do is run through and show you the application itself and demonstrate one of the scenarios that are available, and we'll go ahead with that. Here is our splash screen. This is a screen that our lawyers will populate for us when this application goes live. And then we land on our encounter selection screen. And of course, we have the different scenarios that are available: inpatient, observation, outpatient, time-based billing, and discharge. For our example, we'll go through an inpatient, and available options are initial encounter, subsequent encounters, inpatient consultation, as well as critical care time. For this example, we'll go with a subsequent encounter. We'll click on that. That brings us to the history and exam page. Up at the top, there is a chief complaint. And if you'll notice, there is a blue icon with an information button. By clicking on that, it opens up a simple screen with a little bit of information. This is a very simple example, but it shows some educational material that we have to present to the user about the particular area that they're clicking on. Those are throughout the application. For time's sake, we can't go through all of them, but just wanted to show you that. So moving on with our example, for our patient, we will click on that our chief complaint is present. Moving on to the HPI, for our patient, we've done 4 more elements, so we'll select that. Moving to review of systems, we've gone through 2 to 9 areas for our patient, so we'll take that. And of note, our history level is now, based on what we've chosen, considered to be detailed. So let's now move on to the exam. For our patient, we've done just 1 to 5 elements, which puts our level at a problem-focused level. So the next thing we'll do is click on our medical decision-making calculators, which brings us to our MDM selection page. Of note, based on our history and exam selections we've made so far, our suggested billing code is a 99231. We could, from here, take a guess at what we think we've been doing for the level of care for our patient. And let's say we think that we've done just moderate care. So let's select all of those, as we've done up above. And note that that's increased our suggested billing code to a 99232. But the question is, how accurate were we at that guess? How close are we to actually taking care of the patient at the level that we think we've guessed? Let's see if we can look a little bit closer at that. So we'll click on the diagnoses and help me to decide about that. For this patient, we can pick the types of problems that we're working on. And for our example, we'll say the patient's admitted to the hospital, so they have an established problem that's worsening. So we'll select that. And notice that the application, if we were to only be doing that problem, suggests that that's a low level of for the diagnosis that we've picked. But we're doing more for our patient. And so let's say, for example, they have a stable hypertension and we're working on that, but they've also developed perhaps a cough with some purulent sputum, maybe even a fever, and we want to look into that a little bit closer. So we have established problem. We also have a new problem. So we'll select those. Notice that the application now has changed to a suggested level of high. We only have moderate selected. So let's pick the high. And now we'll see that the suggested billing code is a 99232 still. It hasn't changed based on those selections. But we know that at least we're doing what's accurate for the level of diagnoses. Let's move on and look more closely at the data. Again, we've guessed that we're working on for a moderate level. So for a patient, of course, because of the chronic kidney disease that we're working with, but also for the new pneumonia or possible pneumonia that we're looking at, we're going to order some labs. If labs were the only thing that we're doing, the suggested level for that would only be minimum. We're also going to order a chest X-ray for our patient. So let's pick that. But that's all we're doing for our patient. Notice that our suggested level for the things that we're doing is only a low. We a little bit overestimated what we thought we were doing for our patient. So let's select the low, as we've done here. Note that also has not changed our level of billing, even though we were off by that level of care. So it's still a 99232 for that level. So let's look again now at the risk for this patient. We'll click on our Help Me Decide. Under the risk selection, we have a text box. So we'll click in the text box, which opens up a search window, and we'll type in the letters of our pneumonia as our possible diagnosis. Of course, we only have a little bit of data here. The application is still in development, but this will, of course, be populated before it goes live. So let's select our pneumonia. As you can see here, it carries a suggested level of medium risk with it. We've clicked that. Notice now that is listed underneath our list of selected diagnoses that it carries with us a moderate risk. And it is the case. We happen to guess at the right level of care that we're taking care of for that patient. So are we done? Well, the answer is actually no, because there's more to look into. What we have up here are instructions for when this bell is present, that there are associated diagnoses with the diagnosis that we picked that carry a higher level of care. So let's click on that diagnosis. And here we have our diagnosis of pneumonia. Anyone for any diagnosis, they can look more in detail of what the description of that is. But importantly, below that are a list of illnesses that are commonly associated with that diagnosis that we're taking care of that carry a higher level of risk with them. So it's the case that our patient with pneumonia actually did have some oxygen requirement, 4 liters in fact. And so we'll click on acute respiratory failure with hypoxia. That adds that to our list of selected diagnoses along with the risk level of high. And note the application appropriately is suggesting that that's now a high level of care. We still have moderate selected, so let's select the high. And in doing so, that actually increases our suggested billing code to a 99233. So that's just one example of how the available scenarios within the application and how they work. For time's sake, of course, we can't go through them all. And so for me, this project that we've been working on has been a lot of fun. In fact, as a former software developer, a bit of nostalgia with working with computer science students has been a really nice experience for me. And our path to getting here has been quite interesting. And what I'd like to do is hand it over to Dr. George Inderko, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about that.
Thank you to Manoj and John, and a personal thank you to the folks I'm about to mention. There are many roads to invention and innovation, and ours has been a winding one. We had a lot of help, and I'd like to take a little walk with you down memory lane. So in honor of the fall season and Halloween, grab some s'mores. Let's gather around the campfire for a little not so spooky story time. The idea of the billing app started back in 2009 when I was first starting to practice. Billing was essentially algorithms. Complex, yes, but algorithms nonetheless. I was frustrated when a partner would say, I feel like this is moderate level. There really are no feelings involved. I could see the app in my head, but I didn't know how to make it happen. So the idea would sit on hold even after I joined Ohio State. However, one day my dad handed me a newspaper clipping from the Columbus Dispatch. He knew I was interested in app development, and he found an article about a mobile app that was made by a nurse at Ohio State. The nurse was Rose Chumita, who worked in the Ross, and the app was the My Health Track for patients, I believe, with heart failure. This led me to an email and then a phone call with Rose asking just how she did it. And she pointed me to the first stop on our little road trip, which was biomedical informatics and an individual named Puneet Mathur. By this time, I had brought John on board with his background in IT and coding, neither of which are my forte. At our first meeting with Puneet, we discussed the cost and time to develop this internally through Ohio State. It's a big app with many complex algorithms. The idea we came up with was basically a text-based, non-functional prototype working on one platform as a display piece that we could use for additional fundraising. Basically, just something that we could show other people to say, look what we could make if you just gave us more money. However, the numbers for the cost and the time just to make this non-functional display piece were quite high. Puneet was amazing, and he stopped us there and suggested a different route. He saw a path forward for us via the startup route, something John and I had really not considered. And he sent us to our second stop, which was Stuart Davis at the Technology and Commercialization Office. Stuart and the TCO not only gave us a pathway forward, but really made us feel important and saw the value in what we were trying to accomplish. Stuart has been our encouragement since day one. This was a daunting idea to create a company, but he helped us see the full road and believe we could do it. We discussed some of the various funding opportunities, but he thought our best bet was to head to the Innovation Studio to pitch our idea there. So off I went to our next stop to meet Tim Rattersdorf at the Innovation Studio. I dusted off my old suit, watched a few episodes of Shark Tank, and I felt like I was ready. The Innovation Studio really is its own hour-long talk and probably should have been our first stop on our little journey. If you have an idea or even think you have an idea, stop by, send them an email, and reach out. It's really a think tank and resource hub for inventorship and collaboration. From software to hardware, there are resources, space, and funding to be had there. So my Shark Tank episodes paid off, and Tim liked my pitch. He got us connected with Julia Armstrong in the capstone program at the university, and the Innovation Studio has been funding our capstones ever since. And this brings us to our next stop, which is the capstone program. For those that don't know, the capstone program is essentially the senior project for students in the College of Engineering. Sponsors, such as ourselves, pitch their ideas to the program, and the sponsors that are selected get a team of senior students to try and make that idea happen. These can be one semester projects, or like ours, they can span several with a new team and new ideas each time. These projects aren't just limited to OSU faculty and staff. Anyone can seek to be a sponsor, whether you're an individual, corporation, private company. The fee schedules are different for both, but it's out there for all. Our capstones have been software-based through the computer science department and supported by Julia Armstrong. If you have any software ideas, reach out to her and she will help get you started. For non-software based ideas, you can reach out to Bob Rhodes. Their contact information will be in the slides coming up, so you'll have that. The capstone program has really been the foundation for all of our development. Our first capstone team really set the bar high. They also created our name, which is BITS, Billing Intelligently Through Software. As I mentioned, I am no coder. The way I've worked with our teams is to literally sketch drawings of what I think the phone screen should look like. And then I'll say, you click this button, and then I'll have another sketch and I'll show what the next screen should look like. And it's truly been amazing what they accomplished with my chicken scratch. In one semester, they took us beyond a text-based showpiece to a functional billing app running 2 algorithms with 2 calculators, the data and diagnoses, functional and completed. These were also running on both Apple and Android platforms. What that team did in such a short amount of time for a few $100 was truly astounding. Since then, we've been fortunate to work with many teams, and it has honestly been one of the most rewarding aspects of my career. After our first capstone, we finally brought Manoj on as our coding expert. Also not my forte. For those of you who don't know Mini Nocturnus, we bill one thing and we bill it well, and that is admissions. The 3 of us have spent our evenings every week working with the students, giving them a safe space to develop their client communication skills, along with practical experience. This has included demos throughout the semester where they present their milestone work to us as sponsors with the class and professor in attendance. What has made many of these demos so much fun is the wow factor. They often keep a feature or some surprise on the down low until demo time so they can surprise us with it. And they have many times. That red bell that John showed off was such a moment. It might seem small, but we struggled for several semesters to create a way to identify the related illnesses and show that to the user. So after many semesters, we had an app and thus began the process of turning it into a product for the masses. For OSU, this is done through entrepreneur scouting and startup partnerships. We've been fortunate to work with our partners from the Keenan Center and our ongoing quest to get this app into the hands of physicians everywhere. The Keenan Center looks for entrepreneurs with a background or interest that will mesh with our app and helps our team connect with those individuals. The ultimate goal is to license the technology and allow the entrepreneur to spin up a company or integrate it into one they already have. We've come close a few times and are still in talks with a few individuals, but we've learned that this process takes some time and to keep that champagne corked until the ink is dry. Even for the entrepreneurs we met that didn't pan out, we received great feedback that's only helped improve our app. This is one of 2 apps we have in development right now, with a 3rd in pre-development for next semester. Pre-development basically means lots of chicken scratch sketches from me. Along with the apps, I dusted off an old sketch for a child car seat monitor I made back in 2014 when my son was born, and Stuart has been helping me seek patents for that. The takeaway here is that if you can think it, there are resources out there to help you do it. So that's our story. For our inventors in the audience, I will now hand it over to our partners, Stuart and Nelson, so they can show you what resources are out there to help you make your own story.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stuart Davis, and I'm a Senior Licensing Officer in the Technology Commercialization Office in the Office of Innovation and Economic Development at Ohio State University. And I'm really excited to be part of this talk and be able to talk a little bit about intellectual property and the Technology Commercialization Office and how we work with our inventors at Ohio State. Now, I'm going to start off everything by talking about intellectual property and why intellectual property is important. And in simple terms, intellectual property derives from the work of the mind or the intellect. And it can include an idea, an invention, or a process. And there are 4 main types of intellectual property. I'm going to talk about patents on the next slide, and I'm going to start off this with copyrights. A copyright is a form of original works of authorship, and examples include literary works, films, and paintings. And interestingly, computer programs can also be protected with copyrights. So for this billing app, Ohio State has gone with copyright protection for the app. The next type of intellectual property is a trademark, and this is a non-functional word, logo, slogan, symbol, or design that distinguishes a product or a service. And a good example would be Ohio State's Black O symbol. And trademarks must be used in commerce. And I'm sure as we work with the team and as the startup starts getting developed, we'll come up with a clever logo that will be trademarked for the company. And then lastly is trade secrets. And they're a formula, pattern, or manufacturing process or technical know-how that gives its owner a competitive advantage. And you have to take steps to keep it secret. So this is often challenging in a university setting where folks want to disseminate their knowledge, but it's commonly used by companies. And a classic example is the Coca-Cola recipe. And there's various reasons why intellectual property is important. One of them would be to help protect your innovation, because if you don't have intellectual property protection, others can use your innovation for any purpose, including a commercial use, without needing to receive your permission. It can also help create a marketable asset. And it can also, like in the case of this, start, grow, or expand a business. And if you think like about a pharmaceutical company, IP is usually its most valuable asset. The company's products will be covered by patents covering the novel compounds, trademarks on the product name and logo, and trade secrets on the proprietary manufacturing methods. And John, you can go to the next slide, please. And now I'm going to focus on patents. A patent gives the owner of the patent the right to exclude others from making, using, offering for sale, selling, or importing the invention covered by the patent. It's a handful, but that's what it allows the patent holder to do. Notice I said the word exclude. Just because you have a patent doesn't mean that you'll actually be able to practice the invention, because oftentimes other people may also have patents that your invention falls under. And so you may have to go get the right to be able to use, to practice your invention from other parties. And as doing some research for this talk, I found a 2010 Yale Law paper that said that the best-selling pharmaceuticals usually have over 5 patents per drug. So that means that the companies had to go and get licenses to patents from other parties to be able to produce and sell that drug. Here in the United States, the term for United States utility patent, which is the most common type of patent, is 20 years after the date of application. And it can be a lengthy process to obtain a patent. And John, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Now this slide shows the patent prosecution timeline. We start all the way over to the left with the conception of the invention. And then after that's disclosed to the TCO, we'll do a patentability search, share those results with the inventors, and then through discussions with the inventors, decide if we'll be able to file a provisional patent application. And the provisional patent application came into being probably about 25 years ago now, and it was a great addition by Congress because after the provisional patent application is filed, it just sits in the patent office for a year. It's not examined, and allows the inventors the ability to be able to continue to do additional experiments to be able to further develop the invention. And in addition, now after the provisional patent application has been filed, they can go and start doing talks and presentations about the invention and not have to worry about any public disclosure issues. Now, within that 1-year period, we're going to have to work and decide whether we're going to file a U.S. utility patent application, or if we feel that the invention will have interest from international countries as well, we'll file what's called a PCT patent application, which allows us to do our international filings. It's a nice, convenient one-stop form. Now, after we file that, 30 months now after the initial provisional patent application has been filed, we'll have to start actually filing in the countries like the US, Europe, and other countries. The nice thing about that is another nice thing too about the PCT patent application, because now the inventors have had 30 months to be able to further develop that invention. Now, typically within 1 to 7 years, depending on the complexity and how new the concepts in the invention are, we'll eventually be able to get to patent issuance. So you can see it can be a long, lengthy process, but at the end, it can be very gratifying. And John, you go to the next slide. And now this slide shows the university's intellectual property process. And at most universities, it's the same. It's a virtuous cycle, beginning with the important research conducted by Ohio State's faculty, staff, and students. And then when the researchers make an invention and disclose the invention disclosure to our office, we'll work, like I said earlier, we'll work with our inventors to come up with the intellectual property filing strategy. And then after that patent is filed, and when the inventors have sufficient data for a publication, that's usually the time now where we can go and we can start marketing that invention to other companies to see if there's any commercial interest. Or like George was saying earlier, we'll also then work with the Kingdom Center on a startup as well. Those are the two most common routes, either doing a startup or licensing to an existing company. If we're able to find interest from a company, then we'll negotiate a license with them. And after that license is put in place, then as they start generating revenue, a portion of that revenue will be shared with the inventors and with the college under the Ohio State intellectual property policy. And then the proceeds that are received by the college then will be returned to the OSU research enterprise to help fund additional research and then continue that virtuous cycle. So it's a very nice process. And John, you can go to the next slide. And this slide shows some of the life-improving products that have emerged from university research and university technology transfer. And I'm going to right now focus on Google because it's one of my favorite stories. Back when Larry Page and Sergey Brin were still grad students at Stanford, they came up with this algorithm and were thinking that it might be a nice idea to start a company. So they went and talked with Stanford's technology transfer office, and they put together a license agreement where Stanford got a little piece of equity and got royalties and other types of consideration. And then they went and started Google, which of course now is one of the biggest companies in the world. So that's a great university technology transfer success story. And two local ones here that have an association with Ohio State is the product all the way to the top left, Zolgensma, which is used to treat spinal muscular atrophy. It was developed by researchers at Ohio State and Nationwide Children's and licensed to a local startup called Avexis. And Avexis was acquired by Novartis a couple of years ago, and now Novartis is making that product available to patients. And then Brain Test, which is down at the bottom, it's a company that was developed and took a license to the SAGE test, which was developed by Dr. Doug Shore in neurology as a tool to help detect early signs of cognitive memory or thinking impairments. And then some of these other products also came from University Tech Transfer. Honeycrisp apples came from University of Minnesota. And John, go to the next slide. Now I want to make our pitch to the inventors in the audience. If you developed an idea, discovery, or insight that could have an impact on the world around us, we want to know. We'll happily come to you and discuss your research because that's the funnest and best part of the job. And our website's listed here, and our email address is innovate@osu.edu. And we look forward to hearing from you and starting the discussions. And we're located on a high street in the Gateway Center, so it's an easy walk, or also very convenient parking at the Gateway Garage. And now I'm going to transfer the talk over to Nelson, and he'll talk about the Kingdom Center.
Thanks, Stuart. I appreciate that. So what I want to do in my section of this talk is talk to you a little bit about the startup option, as well as some of the successes that we've seen throughout the university. And maybe more importantly for some of you, talk about some of the resources and support that we provide to those inventors. So if you can move forward one slide, it's really part of the Technology Commercialization Office where the Keenan Center plays a role. And specifically, our role is to kind of help support the creation and the support of new ventures, and to help educate and encourage founders in order to follow these particular research innovations. We provide a campus-wide hub for collaboration, and we're really looking to engage with you in order to provide access to the early stage capital that's going to be needed for startups, the startup talent, as well as programming resources for you to think through whether or not your innovation really is ripe for a startup. So if you can follow on to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about some of the successes before I talk about the support. Today, we have over 100 active startups spun out of licensed technology from the university. Roughly a third of those are from the College of Medicine, a third come out of the College of Engineering, and the remaining third come from the other schools and institutes of the university. In order to make that happen, we really do aim to find good talent to help support the startup. And we do that with something called the Buckeye Executive Network, which is really a collection of business leaders who've had success in their field and in startups. As part of our support, we also provide students to startups as well as to departmental leaders who need help either through research or other efforts. And we provide those students internships through both the Keenan Center directly, as well as through the Wheeler and Wolstein Scholarship Program. In terms of funding, the university provides direct funding through something we call the Accelerator Awards. And maybe more importantly for development of the startups, we provide access to a continuum of funding of both government grants as well as venture capital firms. And so in the last 5 fiscal years, we've helped find over $870 million of outside funding in order to support our startups. Okay, so next slide, please. Now, in terms of support for the startup entities, we realize that it takes a village to make this happen. And so what we will do in collection with folks like Stuart at the licensing team is to really talk early and often to provide some market level expertise around whether the technologies we're talking about are really ripe for commercialization and for startup. And so we'll do that both before and after the actual license agreement gets signed. We're aiming to provide additional experience and expertise in helping researchers grab whatever government capital is available through support on their grant applications, whether that is the Third Frontier funding, the TVSF, or through government grant money like the SBIR and STTR programs. One of the key challenges we found is that there is a desperate need for capital as well as talent in order to make these startups move forward from an idea to actual realization. And so from the talent perspective, we will both directly as well as through our service provider partners, look to find people that can lead the startup as well as provide support for certain operational needs of each startup. We'll offer success models and templates in order to help you communicate your idea so that outside funds and outside resources will be attracted to support the team. We'll provide a lot of guidance in terms of business plans, strategies, operational plans in order to help move the process forward and help the startup become more successful in the marketplace. And we'll provide access to networks, whether it's mentors or students and service providers, in order to help move some of those difficult tasks forward that really most inventors are not particularly familiar with. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay. One of the key things that I'm often asked is, what role can the inventor or the researcher provide? And there's really 5 fundamental profiles that PIs can take in terms of participation with a startup. The first one is actually just hand it off to the licensing organization. All you're really doing is transferring your knowledge to the point at which the license has been signed. And then you just sit back and collect whatever royalties do come in, as that's part of the process in terms of invention disclosure. Some researchers also can benefit by having sponsored research projects. And that is typically occurring when the startup has been able to find outside money and then signs an agreement to help the startup team advance the technology through some well-defined project. Researchers can also move forward by serving as an hourly or other project-based consultants, and that actually has some particular time limits imposed by the policy of the university. And so there is an opportunity to continue to support the startup, but not actually serve within the startup. And then the last two are really to serve as officers within the startup. The Chief Technology Officer truly focuses on the science and technical advancements. And the Chief Executive Officer often focuses on outside stakeholders. And that means, for example, finding capital, working on customer and vendor relationships, and supporting other teams that are not directly impacting whether the technology advances. And so those two particular ones, because of some of the time commitments, often mean that the researcher has to figure out whether or not they want to take a leave of absence if the time commitment that's needed for the startup exceeds what the university policy allows. Okay, so those are your 5 basic ways to participate in a startup once you've disclosed your invention to the Technology Commercialization Office and folks like Stuart. Okay, and next slide, please. So I want to just emphasize to you that the Keenan Center is really here to help each of these inventors move forward with support in capital, in thinking through what the business plan is, in finding talent in order to help support the advancement of the business enterprise, as well as providing programming resources and events to help educate future inventors in order to think through whether a startup makes sense for them. Thanks. And so what I'd like to do is bring it back to George and then also to our Q&A session.
Again, I wanted to thank the audience, the panel members, and organizers for this unique opportunity. Thank you to the leadership at the Division of Hospital Medicine for supporting us in this endeavor. Please reach out to me or any of our panel members if we can help you bring your own ideas to life. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Catagnani and open it up to questions.
Thanks. I'll stay on a little bit to see if anything pops up. Of course, I have my own questions, but I just wanted to know, in talking with George, I think maybe something has changed recently, whereas the developer or the person who suggests the startup, it used to be a lower amount of reimbursement going forth in perpetuity. I think it was something like 5%, but that number has increased recently. Is that right for those who contribute these ideas?
Are you talking about the sharing of the licensing revenue under the
Yes.
intellectual property policy? Yeah, so for revenue less than $100,000 cumulative, 50% will go to Ohio State and 50% of the revenue will go to the inventors that are listed on the invention disclosure. Now, when it's greater than $100,000, then it's 34% goes to the inventors, 33% will go to their college, and then 33% will go to Ohio State. So yeah, so it's a nice policy, and that will go through perpetuity. And if the inventor leaves the university, all we'll need is just their forwarding information, and that and the revenue will continue to go to them.
Okay, and then again, as an outsider listening to George, it really sounds like you didn't need to have this Swift coding knowledge or app development knowledge. He brought sketches to you with his ideas. It's like you can start as raw as the basic idea. Am I right with that? Or how would you best present your first steps to your team?
Your options, really, I think one of the good first stops should be the Innovation Studio. They can help set you up with the people that are going to help. So when I went to the Innovation Studio, I didn't go in there saying, hey, I need a group of coders. I kind of said, this is my idea. I think it would be pretty cool. I'm not really sure how to make it. And they were the ones who said, and they know we have these resources available to you. If you go to their website, they will show you where they've helped people develop things through 3D printing methods, metalworking. There's so many different resources, and every one of the capstone program is one of those options if you enjoy working with students. But every one of the departments in the College of Engineering does those capstone programs. So whether or not you have a software idea or you want to build, I think one of the capstones was looking at a type of drone, looking with the mechanical engineering department. So that is where I would start first.
And if you have compounds, research tools, things like that, then you can just disclose them directly to the office. Because in that case, then we'll just work with the inventors then to figure out how best to think about the intellectual property protection, and then also what companies and other folks may be out there who might be interested in using that technology.
Okay, and I think George answered a question from one of our guests about Julie Armstrong being the contact for app development in the capstone project there. And then would you say that app development is what is either the most popular or the easiest point of entry for people with an idea, or what would you say is the lowest bar to climb to get into this?
You know, I'd say if you have an idea, and it could be a device, it could be a potential new therapeutic, it could be a useful tool that you're using in your lab, or it could be a piece of, a software. It runs the gambit. There's no hurdle. We've also been talking to folks quite a bit lately too for kind of more copyrightable materials that maybe they're using that the colleagues at other institutions have expressed interest in. And we can also work with them to come up with ways to help disseminate that.
And then I'll just keep going because I have so many more questions. See if anything else pops up before the 1 o'clock hour hits. But how can you, or have you already worked within our EMR to improve either the patient side experience or the physician experience with using our particular brand of Epic, IHIS, and
EMRs are an interesting hurdle, because when you're talking about an EMR, you're talking about massive companies in Cerner and Epic. And as we know from going from Ohio State, up to the 6th floor to Select, everybody's flavor of Epic is very different. So it's a difficult prospect to say, I have an idea on how to make Epic better. And going up to trying to go to Epic and saying, hey, I have this idea for you, Epic, and hoping that Epic gives you credit or something for that idea, rather than just going, thank you for that idea, we will take it from here. And then as far as getting that idea out to everybody, again, it's a matter of, are they going to activate and pay for that module within Epic? Or are you going to end up with the bargain basement version of Epic? So we kind of struggled with that with this particular product, and that's why we wanted to keep it agnostic. OSU is kind of an interesting bird in that everything's very contained in OSU, but for a lot of docs, they might have a different billing resource that they use in their office. Maybe they go to certain hospitals as affiliates, or maybe they work at several hospitals. Maybe you have a group like Sound, who has hospitals all across the country, and they don't really have say in whether or not Epic is, or whatever EMR their hospitals they're at, have implemented certain modules. So if you look at a multinational hospital, that's where something like this can be beneficial to them. They don't have to worry about what EMR they're using.
it looks like lastly, we have a question about what programming language your particular app was written in and when the app will be available for download.
The The language, I'm not sure
It's
if
React
I
Native
I
is-
don't know if we
Right.
can disclose that.
Oh,
So I'll leave it to Stuart whether or not we can
Stuart.
disclose any of the back end stuff. But as far as when it will be available, my understanding with the licensing was that the Ohio State would still retain rights to develop our version, before we handed it off internally as we go along. So right now, we're managing this on a private server. So the cost for the server is currently being reimbursed, but in order to roll this out to the university for other folks to be able to download, we would have to look towards getting this onto a Ohio State server. And one of the reasons that it is on a private server is because having students coding behind our firewalls is a no-no. So we probably need to go through biomedical informatics to work on getting it into our servers.
George, just throwing this out, one thing you may want to think about eventually is it is using this as an opportunity for some beta testing. Let folks play with it and provide feedback.
I do want to do that. One of the interesting things is we've kind of gone on over the past 2 semesters. So initially, when we developed this, the students actually used their own free account servers to run this app. And every semester it became taking the app down and then redeploying it on new servers with every new team. So we finally decided to create our own server to run the app. That way we didn't have to take it down and put it back up again. What was surprising and what was great from a certain standpoint was that this brought cost into it, because now we're not dealing with a free server that the students get. And the university reimbursed me, but it's a nice little credit card hit every month. But it's helped us realize the cost of running these servers. So one of the barriers to us laying this out for the university and for our department to start trying out is just with the increased load on the servers, trying to determine some of that cost. It's been great for the students because as they talk about implementing different features into the app, we can now discuss with them, what's that going to do to our price tag? So as the students are presenting stuff, what's really cool that a lot of the other capstones don't have this, is they're talking about cost.
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. And thanks to Nelson Law and Stuart Davis. Thanks, George, Manoj, and John, and hopefully more to come and more to hear from you soon. Thanks for your talk.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone.